Lesson 6 has just one objective, which is to be able to use algebraic addition to add multiple integers. So thinking back to lesson 5, we were using a number line in order to add various integers together and having to move to the right when we were adding a positive number and to the left when we were adding a negative number. And so algebraic addition is just going to be a quicker way for adding integers together. And it may seem kind of basic, especially the first example or two, but it's important to understand mostly because we are dealing now with signed numbers and adding together both positive and negative numbers. So it's important to understand how that works. We have two rules that go together when we are adding any pairs of integers. So the first option, or I guess the first scenario we might have, is we might be adding two numbers that have the same sign. So we're either adding two positive numbers together or we're adding two negative numbers together. When the numbers have the same sign, this is the rule to follow. We are going to add their absolute values and then give the results the same sign. So for example, here we have positive 1 plus positive 3. So the absolute value of positive 1 is 1, and the absolute value of positive 3 is 3. So when we add those absolute values together, we get a result of 4, and then we're going to assign the same sign as the numbers we were adding together, which would be positive. I don't need to necessarily write a positive sign, and so we get 4. Over here, we are adding two negative numbers, negative 1 plus negative 3. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. When we add those together, we get 4, and now we're going to assign that result the same sign as these numbers. So negative 1 plus negative 3 is negative 4. Our only other option, besides adding either two positive numbers or two negative numbers together, would be to add both a positive and a negative number together. So in instances in which the signs do not match, two numbers with different signs, what we're going to do there is we're going to take the difference in absolute values and then give the result the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. Okay, that's a lot of words. Let me show you what that looks like practically. So here we have negative 1 plus positive 3. So let's find the absolute values of both of those first. So the absolute value of negative 1 is 1, and the absolute value of positive 3 is 3. Now, because these have different signs, opposite signs, we're going to take the difference between the absolute values. So the difference between 1 and 3 is 2. And lastly, we're going to give that result the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. So we can see here are absolute values. 3 is the greater number, and 3 had a positive sign, which I'll just write. Therefore, negative 1 plus positive 3 is positive 2. Over here, we have positive 1 plus negative 3. Let's follow the same process. The absolute value of positive 1 is 1. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. The difference between 1 and 3 is 2. And now the greater absolute value would be 3, or is 3. And that one had a negative sign, so that means that our answer here will be negative. So positive 1 plus negative 3 is negative 2. Right. And then lastly, let's look down here, and this is going to be a term that you're going to need to memorize, the additive inverse. So the additive inverse essentially is the opposite. And any real number other than 0 has an opposite. So essentially it is 1 and negative 1, 2 and negative 2, 4.5 and negative 4.5. Okay, so an opposite, an additive inverse, will have the same absolute value, but the opposite sign. Okay, so here's a couple of more examples here, positive 2 and negative 2, positive 8 and negative 8. And a key thing to know about additive inverses is that the sum of any number and its additive inverse is always going to be equal to 0. Okay, and this makes sense if you think about back to when we were adding on a number line, right? So let's say that you're going, let's say here's 7 and -7, right? So we're starting at 7, and then we're going to add -7. Well, we end up right back at 0. Let's say we start at -7 and we add +7, we end up back at 0. Okay, so there's just a visual representation of what we're doing here. But the key to know is that any number and its additive inverse, when you add those together, the sum will be equal to 0. Add those together, the sum will be equal to 0.